Have you ever wondered how a single assassination in a city like Sarajevo could possibly drag the entire globe into a massive war? Well, the answer is all tangled up in a web of alliances and secret promises. In this explainer, we're going to untangle that web and see exactly how the teams were picked for World War I.
Right, so who was fighting who? How did these teams even get started? And maybe most interestingly, did anybody end up switching sides? Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to look at Europe before 1914. And honestly, it was basically a powder keg. You had the whole continent divided into two major alliances. Now, this system was supposed to create stability, but instead it turned into a tripwire for war.
So on one side, you had the Triple Entente. Think of it as a kind of friendly understanding between Great Britain, France, and Russia. And on the other side, you had the Triple Alliance. This one was way more formal, a full-on defensive pact that linked Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So you can just imagine the tension building between these two massive blocs.
Now, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, that was the spark. But these alliances, they were the fuse. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and Germany immediately has their back. While Russia saw itself as Serbia's big protector, so it starts getting its army ready. And that, right there, was the first domino. It set off this crazy chain reaction that pulled everybody in. So, let's take a look at the first team to really come together, the Allied powers. They basically grew right out of that Triple Entente we just talked about. At its core, you had France and Russia, who already had a solid pact. Now, Great Britain, they were a little hesitant at first. They only jumped in after Germany invaded neutral Belgium, which broke a treaty that Britain had promised to uphold. Of course, Serbia was in from day one. They were the ones who got attacked. And, kind of surprisingly, Japan joined the Allies pretty early on, seeing it as a perfect chance to grab Germany's colonies over in Asia. And on the other side of the conflict, we have the Central Powers. And you know what? Their name tells you pretty much everything you need to know about their biggest strategic problem. They were completely surrounded. The Central Powers were made up of four key nations. You had Germany and Austria-Hungary, who were the original partners that kicked the whole thing off. Pretty soon, they were joined by the Ottoman Empire later in 1914, and then Bulgaria jumped in a year later in 1915. And this quote, man, it just sums up their geographical problem perfectly. Being central was not a good thing here. It was a total strategic nightmare. They were stuck in the middle with enemies on both sides just waiting to crush them. So being encircled like this completely dictated their entire war strategy. You've probably heard of Germany's Schlieffen Plan. Well, that whole idea was designed to knock France out of the war super fast, so they could then turn all their firepower on the massive Russian army in the east. They were literally in a race against the clock from the second the first shot was fired. So the first teams were set, but the incredible pressure of this war started causing some really dramatic changes. You had nations literally shopping around, trying to figure out who was offering them the best deal in a world that had gone completely crazy. Okay, the biggest plot twist of the war? It had to be Italy. Remember how they were in that triple alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary? Well, when the war started, they basically said, hey, that was a defensive alliance, you guys are the attackers, so we're out. They sat on the sidelines for a year. Then, in 1915, they did a complete 180 and joined the Allies, who had secretly promised them a big chunk of Austrian land. You can imagine how Germany and Austria felt. It was a total backstab. The Central Powers got some new members too, which really expanded the conflict. The Ottoman Empire was really worried about Russia, so they saw Germany as their best bet for protection. And then there was Bulgaria. They were still really bitter about losing to Serbia in the recent Balkan Wars, so they joined the Central Powers because, well, they made a better offer, a chance to get revenge and take back Serbian land. By 1917, Europe was just exhausted. The war had become this bloody stalemate, and people at home were starving. Germany, feeling that pressure more than anyone, decided it was time to roll the dice on two massive and ultimately fatal gambles. So in this absolutely stunning turn of events, the entire Russian Empire just collapses. The new Bolshevik government wanted out of the war no matter the cost. For Germany, this looked like a huge win. It freed up nearly 1 million of their troops. But the situation at home was so desperate, mostly because of a crippling British naval blockade, that they were forced to take an even bigger risk. Because they were facing starvation, Germany went all in on unrestricted submarine warfare. Their goal was to starve Great Britain into submission before the United States could get its military ready to fight. And at the exact same time, they were hatching this secret plot to keep America busy on its own continent.
And that secret plot? It was all laid out in something called the Zimmermann Telegram. It was this top-secret coded message sent from Berlin all the way to Mexico City. The only problem for Germany was British intelligence had already cracked their codes, and they intercepted this absolute diplomatic bombshell.
I mean, the offer was just audacious. It proposed a full-on military alliance. The deal was, if the U.S. declared war on Germany, Mexico was supposed to attack the United States. And Germany's promise? They'd help Mexico reconquer its lost territory, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So, naturally, the British shared the telegram with the Americans. It got leaked to the press, and the American public just went ballistic. And then came the real shocker. Germany's own foreign secretary, a guy named Arthur Zimmermann, actually admitted he sent it. That, on top of the constant sinking of American ships by German U-boats, left President Wilson with absolutely no choice. America was going to war.
Germany's massive gamble had backfired spectacularly. Their submarines didn't starve Britain, and now they had a brand new, incredibly powerful enemy. Fresh American troops, nicknamed Doughboys, started pouring into Europe, and they completely tipped the scales on the Western Front, which had been locked in this deadly stalemate for years.
Germany threw every last thing it had into one final spring offensive in 1918. But with all these American troops plugging the gaps in the Allied lines, the offensive completely failed. One by one, their allies, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary, all collapsed. Surrounded and starving, Germany had no other option. They had to surrender. So the great irony in all of this is that the very system that was designed for security, where nations promised to protect each other, became the tripwire for a global catastrophe. The alliances that were supposed to keep the peace actually guaranteed that one little spark in the Balkans would set the entire world on fire.